Hello and welcome to Pharma Television News Review here at Owls Biotech in Melbourne in October 2010. On this show, I have John Ballard, who is chairman of BioAngels, based in Adelaide in Australia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
John, you are I could describe you as a veteran of the biotechnology industry here in Australia. You have a lot of experience in biotech, particularly because you were founded one of the first biotech companies here in Australia. And I'd like you to tell me the story about how you set that company up, and also to find out more about your experience as being now an angel investor. So let's go back to those early days and how it came about that you set up this company called GroPep.
Yes, thank you. What happened was that myself and a colleague in the university near us had discovered an entirely new growth factor. We licensed it, or were trying to license it, to a major pharmaceutical company, or maybe major biotechnology company. And what we found was that the company wasn't particularly interested in talking to a lot of different people. They wanted one entity. And that's where the university and CSIRO, who I worked for, decided to set up GroPep. And I joined it initially part-time as CEO, and the licensing deal went through.
Well, tell us a little bit about the growth factor, because you had certain ambitions for it, but it went in a particular direction. So the growth factor was?
Yes, the growth factor was DES1-3 IGF-1. It's a modified version of insulin-like growth factor 1. I was particularly interested in a treatment for muscular dystrophy. I had a number of colleagues in that area, and I realised that if you could improve the growth of wasted muscle cells, you might be able to treat the disease. Sure. The licensee that we dealt with was more interested in what would now be called catabolic disease, AIDS, and other conditions where wasting occurred. And again, growth factor needs were pretty obvious, if they would work and if they were safe. And that was hence the license deal. Now, it became evident rather quickly that growth factors were a worry, because they also cause cancer cells to grow. And although normal cells are stimulated, so are cancer cells. And so the whole field of using growth factors as therapeutic treatments looked a bit and became rather wobbly. Now, at the same time, we'd been working on this growth factor, essentially like growth factor 1, in cultured cells as part of our assay system. And we realised that industrial growth of cells by the pharmaceutical industry really required the factors that didn't need use of serum. And hence, that became the main business of the company, GroPep.
Right. Now, obviously, that's a classic story in some ways, because you set up a biotech company, you try and do a partnership with another company, you have your aims, and eventually, you may not achieve those aims, but you may adapt to a new future. But importantly, you had to go through a series of rounds of financing, presumably, in those early days, which may have been much more difficult than it is even today.
No, actually we didn't, because we did what I think is fairly typical of Australian companies. We had a side business selling reagents, making and selling reagents. They happened to be growth factors and antibodies to those growth factors. And the cash flow from that helped the company going. So really right from the outset, the company was cash flow neutral, and we were putting all of the money into the development program. So the only time we raised money was when we listed on the stock exchange.
And when did you do that?
In 2000.
And how much money did you raise at that time?
We raised about 17 million altogether at that time.
And what was the purpose of that raising? What were you trying to apply that to?
Well, again, really to expand the company in terms of pharmaceutical development. The use of these growth factors broadened that. We were also looking at them from milk, or particularly bovine colostrum, but milk as well. And there seemed to be good opportunities. We set up a number of clinical trials, not using the recombinant growth factor, but natural growth factor mixtures. And so that was what most of the cash raise was used for.
Right. And then that company was eventually sold to Novozymes.
Yes, it was sold to Novozymes in 2005, I believe. I'd left the company in 2002. But it was a successful sale, and Novozymes, at least for the first 2 or 3 years, kept it going very actively.
Right. So your experience was from startup all the way through to IPO and then up to eventual sale.
Yes, I even had something at the beginning of that, invention. So the invention of the IP which enabled the startup.
Which is very important. Of course, that reflects your scientific background,
Indeed.
obviously, which was important. So now you've moved and you're chairman of BioAngels. Could you tell us a bit about BioAngels, what your purpose is, who do you work with, what are you looking to invest in?
Okay, BioAngels is a group of individuals who invest their own money. That's the first thing. It's not a fund. There's 20 of us at the moment, and what we do is we evaluate as a group, or we have an executive officer as well, opportunities, and there are plenty of those around, to see those which would need modest amounts of money to take them to an inflection point. Maybe profitability, maybe not profitability, but nonetheless a commercial inflection point. So it's not competing with venture capital industry so much. It's a little bit earlier. We're talking about $250,000 to $1 million raising, a quarter from ourselves usually, and the rest through syndicated investment. And that's a space that the VC industry never really liked, and today they like it a lot less.
Right. And so obviously you said there's a lot of opportunities out there. From your experience at GroPep, now in this new environment, which funding is tough anyway.
Absolutely.
What is your preferred investment?
Well, I guess that the preferred investment is one that has some downside protection, first of all. In other words, I'm learning from my own GroPep experience, if you've got a cash flow business in parallel with a drug development business, and if things get pretty tough, you don't collapse.
Sure.
You pull your head in a bit. So what we see is that as a preferred investment, one which has either some sales, and that can be, very small companies can have sales, particularly if they're reagents, or they can even be service businesses, or these types of things. So that's our preferred one side. The second side is because when the VC investment comes in, it often is pretty rough on the early investors. We tend to favour company investments which are not likely, at least when we invest in them, to require venture capital.
So obviously here in Australia, there's popular to put companies quickly onto ASX, at least in the past. Does that still work? And does it work for companies that you invest in?
It hasn't in recent 3 or 4 years. The window is definitely closed for classic biotech companies. The exception, if you can call it that, are companies which are using money that they raise on a listing or subsequent to a listing to expand activities which are generating revenue, or build a pilot plant, something like that. So what we do see, and from our group as BioAngels, what we're interested in is less like the pharmaceutical development company or drug discovery company, but those which could be reagent companies, they could be medical device companies, perhaps diagnostics, ag bio, and industrial biotech. And this is what we see quite a lot of.
Right. Now, ultimately, you want to get your money back.
Of course.
So
with a bit more, please.
with a little bit more. And, well, sometimes you don't get your money back. But what's important is that you do. And with an IPO market closed, or more or less slammed shut, and so the exit has to be acquisition, has to be a trade sale.
Almost certainly. I think the exception would be if a company is nicely and profitable, and the profits are growing with sales, then you could list it. But you know, that's a big ask for any company in the sector.
Right. And so let's just go back to the types of companies you invest. We're obviously talking about companies that are in the life sciences sphere. So
exclusively, yes.
Exclusively, you're not into anything peripheral to that at all. In other words, you're not into services to the farming businesses or food industry and so forth.
But one of our investments, for example, is a company which has engineered clover, so that the seeds of clover are much easier to harvest. So, you know, but it's classic biotechnology, and its market is to expand those cells, those seeds, and sell them. So, you know, it's the same. Really, it's just ag bio.
So when you look at I described you as a veteran of the biotech industry in Australia. You have seen the changes that happened over the years if we just look at the slot where we're at the moment, particularly over the last few years, and it's not just a phenomenon here in Australia, it's a phenomenon worldwide. What do you think? We're here at Oz Biotech. How do you feel about your industry? How would you diagnose it, and what prospects do you have for the biotech industry, particularly here in Australia?
Well, I think it's tough worldwide in terms of raising finance. The pharmaceutical industry, that component is seeing its profitability dropping as generics become much a big part of the business. That'll continue, sales to third world companies, etc. But overall sales will go up. What I think is going to be a real growth area is industrial biotech, biofuels. For example, one of the companies that I'm involved with makes enzymes for oil exploration. I never knew enzymes were used in oil exploration, and I'm an enzymologist by training. Right. So I think we just have to look broader and say, well, what are the opportunities? There'll still be good ones in the pharmaceutical side, but alongside that, there'll be many others as well.
So are you saying then that if you're talking about therapeutically based companies, it's a much higher risk for any investor to get into these days, and the preferred profile of a company is one that has lower risk, innovative but lower risk, early to market, early cash flows coming in?
I think that's right. I think what we are seeing here in Australia is universities and other public sector institutions are setting up their own funds and are supporting in-house. They may not be companies at this stage, but inventions which become companies, and they leave later. So when a cash investor comes in, they're more mature in the sense of their products, and I think that's a tendency we'll see worldwide. The public sector institutions will take the inventions further.
And as a group, the 20 of you, hopefully you've got a similar view on what you want to get out of the investments you get. But what are your expectations? What sort of level of return, and when do you expect that return for the types of investments that you do?
I can answer that in two ways. First of all, based on experience, not so much for us because we've only been going for 8 years, but the Angel Capital Association in the US is collecting vast amount of data, and they're talking about average returns of about threefold in an average of 5 years. Now, I think many people only tell the good news, and I don't think it's as good as that. But on the other hand, what we will see is a lot of failures. Always, and out of 10, 5 will fail. You'll either get nothing back, or in Australia, the best you'd get is a tax deduction for your losses. But what you're hoping, of course, is that of the remaining percentage, 50%, say, 1 or 2 do very well. That requires an exit. An IPO isn't an exit. Your shares will be in escrow for a while, but it's a move to an exit. But a trade sale is the obvious way to go.
John Ballard, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show.
Pleasure.